talk about preventing fraud in your congregation, because now it's time to make sure that that money you've collected or been given, that you take care of it responsibly. Who is the insurance board? We are a property and casualty insurance program. That means covering the building and the liability for churches. And we serve only certain denominations. The main ones that I serve here in the Rocky Mountain Conference is the United Church of Christ, the Rocky Mountain Conference, the Disciples of Christ region, and the Presbyterian Plains and Peaks, and the Presbyterian Denver Presbyterian. Those are the ones that I take care of. And right now I have a little over 50 of the 70 some United Church of Christ churches in the conference insured. So the majority of our churches in the conference are insured with the insurance board. And that's really a good thing, because the more churches we have, the lower we can keep premiums, the more we can get our resources out there to protect the churches from having losses. And that's what I'm going to share with you today, is one of those resources. And then I'm going to show you a couple more resources. But the insurance board started a little over 30 years ago because it was difficult to get insurance in California with the earthquakes, in Florida, in the Gulf and the Eastern Coast because of hurricanes. Churches were having, the United Church of Christ churches were having a hard time getting insurance. So they formed the insurance board, and it's a nonprofit insurance program. When they do make money, they try to keep the premiums down, or they try to bring out resources that are going to help the churches be a safer place to be. So that's a little bit about the insurance board, but I feel that I, as your local agent for the Rocky Mountain Conference, I'm a little different than most insurance agents, I feel. First of all, I am a member of the United Church of Christ. I belong to Parkview Congregational Church. I've been moderator of that church twice. I've been chair of the trustees, I don't know how many years. I've been a Sunday school teacher, so I know what's going on in United Church of Christ churches because I've been active at my local church. And as Sue will tell you, I've been active at the conference level quite a bit. I have been on the finance chair. I was chair of the finance committee, and then I became the treasurer, and I was on the board of directors for the conference for, I think, about 8 years. And so I know what's going on in the conference, and I know many of what's going on in all the churches around the conference because I insure most of them. Just thought I'd point that out, so I feel like I'm a little bit different. I'm not just an insurance agent, I'm one of you. And the insurance board is actually owned by the conferences of the United Church of Christ. Well, our mission statement is to support and protect churches and church ministries by offering superior property and casualty risk and insurance management services. And there's a big key. Insurance management services is to not only just sell you insurance like most companies do, we give you the resources to prevent losses, to make your church a safe place for children, to make your church a safe place for the elderly. So we're more than just insurance. And our vision statement, to become the program of choice for the denominations we serve, which is the United Church of Christ. And I'm going to talk about a little background on fraud, and then I'm going to talk about how to maybe prevent it, how to detect it, and how to respond if there is fraud in your church. I'm going to start off with the background. According in 2017, 1 in 10 churches has had someone embezzle funds from their church. And it's probably higher than that because we can only know what we know, and we know that's a fact. There might be more out there. I know that at least 3 times in the 15 years I've represented the insurance board for the Rocky Mountain Conference, at least 3 times I've had calls from churches where they said, hey, Matt, are we covered if we had somebody collecting the offering plates and they were skimming off the top the cash out of there? Are we covered for that? And I go, yeah, you are. You're definitely covered. Unfortunately, it's a minimal amount each time. And unfortunately, it was over a long period of time and they couldn't document it. The only reason they go, we don't want to turn, all three of them said, we don't want to turn in a claim, but we want to just make sure we're covered if something bigger happened. And all three of these said that they had the same person counting the money every Sunday for the last 10, 15 years. And then all of a sudden, when they stopped that job, the amount of money that was coming in cash in those offering plates were double and triple the amount. And so they had no fact that they were taking the money, but they thought maybe they were. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The one that I thought was interesting was this second bullet point. In the same study, pastors were asked when the last time a financial audit was conducted. 10% said 5 years or more ago. 14% said they were not sure. What does that mean? That means probably not. 10% said an audit had never been conducted. So when you look at that, that's 34% probably have had no audits in the last 5 years. Well, you know what can happen in 5 years? A lot. Depending on the size of your church, if you have money embezzled from your church, whether you're a church that only has a $50,000 budget a year and somebody's taken $500 a year out of there, that's big. Or if you're a multi-million-dollar church and you lose a lot of money, that's big. And you're there to protect those people who've given you that money. And so you got to make sure you're responsible with that. And I thought this was an interesting fact that I found was that 26% of all churches that they did this survey on, only 26% of them only have financial means for 7 weeks of operating in the bank. 7 weeks. 24% said they could cover between 8 and 15%, 8 to 15 weeks. So that means almost half the churches out there only have, half of them could go on past 15 weeks if they had no money coming in. So that's why you need the endowment set up so that you have that there, and then you need to make sure it's safe. Some cases that came up. In 2018, a treasurer was convicted of embezzling a total of $44,000 from several UCC congregations over 2 years. In that case, a church secretary noticed an ordinary amount of extra checks that were being written. And that's how that person got caught. And then there's another one in 2013, a UCC church secretary was convicted of embezzling $88,000 over a course of 10 months. Well, when you got a church that's got over a multi-million-dollar budget, that can happen. And in that case, they found 70 checks that she had written in that 2-year period to her, or that 10-month period to herself. And then I'm going to share one that happened in our conference that the office manager was ordering supply, and I'm just pointing these out because these are things that can happen and you need to have your eyes open to watch out for this. They were ordering supplies, and they'd order supplies from Office Depot or Amazon. Whenever they'd order supplies, they'd order a couple $100 extra gift cards for themselves. And then that gift card went in their pocket. Or plane tickets or supplies for personal use. It's not hard to do if you're not watching it. And then I had another interesting, I think this was a Disciples of Christ church pastor that shared this with me about a year ago. There was a church, and this was not embezzlement, but I thought this was interesting because this person who was counting the money every Sunday would get the offering plate, lay it down, count out all the money. They'd count how much cash was there. And let's say there was $150. They'd take their checkbook out, write a check for $150, and put it into the offering plate and take the cash, put it in their pocket. Well, they weren't cheating the church, but they were cheating the IRS because they were turning around and writing all that off. And they figured this guy had done that for about 10 years. So, I mean, he was probably writing off thousands of dollars a year in donations that were the other people's donations that they were given in cash. So those are just, you know, that it's not embezzlement, but it's not morally or ethically correct. And that could cause other problems later. You know, if they're getting away with that, maybe they'll try something else. A couple other things are billing schemes, checks payable to cash, misuse of employee credit cards, skimming out of the offering plate. I covered most of those. But, you know, that's why, well, we'll talk about that. Most fraud occurs when these items are present. This is why it occurs. Opportunity is probably the leading cause. So guess what? If you have some policies in place to take that opportunity away, you probably won't be embezzled against. Some of those, we're going to go over some of those things here in a little bit. Financial pressures, if you know somebody's in financial trouble, that gives them a reason. The other one is rationalization. They rationalize it with themselves why they're taking that money. I'm an employee, I'm a church secretary, I'm making $11, $12 an hour, let's say, or even $15 an hour, but I work my butt off and I feel like I'm underpaid. And I have this opportunity to order that $100 gift card when I order the supplies and nobody will know. I'm just paying myself what I think I'm deserved. So those are the rationalization that some people put. And unfortunately, when opportunities and rationalization come into play and they get by with $10 or $20 here, then it goes up to 50, then it goes up to 100, and it can even get into the thousands. So that's why if you have the policies in place, they'll see that you've got these policies in place and they maybe won't do that. You can never stop everyone, unfortunately. Prevention. How do we prevent some of these things? Internal controls are the big things. Screening and supervision, internal controls, cash management, and yearly independent audit. And when that says yearly independent audit, I know at the church where I belong at Parkview, what they did, I'm not sure what they do anymore because I'm not active at the church, I just go. But what we did was every year we would have 2 people that were not on the finance committee, not on the treasurer, not the secretary, 2 independent people from the congregation that would go through the books, go through the credit card statements, go through the checkbook, and look to see if they thought they saw any abnormalities. Now, on the credit card statements, I'd probably suggest that if you have a church credit card and 1 or more people are using that credit card, that you have somebody go through that credit card statement and just make sure that everything looks right. And that, you know, you get an Amazon bill for $5,000 for supplies that you question, okay, I need the detail on that Amazon bill. And you can actually go to Amazon and ask them for that. Conduct background checks and credit checks on all staff and volunteers that will handle any church funds. And you say, well, why do we need to do a credit check? Well, if they're handling church funds, you want to make sure that they're responsible in their own lives with their finances. Not saying they can't do anything, but you've got to make sure they're somewhat responsible on their own finances before you let them start working on your own finances at your church. And background check is just a no-brainer. And most of you already know this, but the insurance board offers discounted rates for background checks. We only charge, I think it's $12 for the most extensive background check we offer. And if you don't have your insurance with the insurance board, it's $24. And that's imperative that you do that on anybody that works with money. And I would also say anybody who works with children. But we're here to talk about money. And look for the warning signs. Keep your eyes open for warning signs. If, you know, somebody one week tells you they just are broke and they don't have any money and their car's shot and they don't know what they're going to do, and then all of a sudden they show up with a brand new car. Wonder how that happened. You know, and you can just ask questions like, you know, I thought you weren't able to get a new car. How'd you do that? You know, and just kind of feel them out so that you can make sure they're not taken from your offering plate. Internal controls. Signers of checks should not be the person authorizing the expense. So the person who's writing the check should not be the person who's ordering the business supplies, because there's no oversight there. 2 individuals to sign checks that exceed a certain predetermined amount. We have that at the conference level. I can't remember what the amount was, but I remember we put that in place when I was on the board. And we've moved that number up and down over the years depending on what's going on, because sometimes it's hard for Sue to find a second signer. And so we've moved it around, but if the check's over a certain amount, there's got to be 2 signers. All disbursements should be made by pre-numbered checks. That's pretty simple and seems like that'd be a no-brainer, but it doesn't happen always. Bank statements should be reconciled, once again, by someone who's not writing the checks, because that'd be too easy. If they're writing the checks and balancing your checkbook, guess what? They could pretty much do anything they want. You're giving them that door of opportunity to do what they want with that money. All checks should have an invoice or check request that matches the amount that's dispersed. I know at Parkview, we use little slips of paper. You got to write down what the money was, what you spent the money on for, and then they take that, and that's what they write the check from, and then they keep that in the file so they know where that money went. Bank checks should not be signed in advance. Don't keep a drawer full of signed checks in there. Not a good idea. Implementation of credit card policy, that one's really important. And that's the one where I personally have seen some fraud, is that credit card, because it's so easy to use and the credit card statement comes in and they don't review everything that's in there. Cash management guidelines should require distribution of donation envelopes to congregants instead of offering plate. This one I'm not sure I agree with, but they say that this would probably get rid of taking the cash if people had to put the cash in an envelope and then in an offering plate, and then 2 people. Always have 2 people count your money. Always, never one person. And the way, if you are only having one person count the cash at the present time, let them know it's not that, you don't even have to say that. Just say, we have a new policy in place. 2 people need to count the cash in the room. One person counts it, then the other person counts it. And they were doing it to help, to protect them. You're protecting them of being accused of anything. And so that's why you have to look at it, that when you put a policy together, it's not that we think somebody's dishonest, but we're protecting that person from being accused at some point. There's the 2 unrelated cash count. Yeah, don't have a husband and wife count the cash. That's not 2, that's still 1. So you gotta have 2 unrelated people. Rotate the cash counters. You could do, you know, instead of having these 2 people do it this Sunday, these 2, you have 8 people, 2 on each Sunday, and you rotate it, and then you can kind of see if there's a fluctuation too. You'd be able to watch for that. It says counting should be done in a locked room. I'm not sure about that. Most people just do it in their back room of their office. But I know for a while at Parkview Congregation, this is over 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I was on the trustees, and I found out that our financial secretary was basically taking all the offering plates, dumping them into a bag, and then taking them home and counting it all at home. And I'm like, oh my God, we got to change this. I go, this isn't going to work. And that was even before I was with the insurance board. I'm like, once again, the opportunity was there. Even though I had no doubt she was honest and everything, but we needed to protect her. They say this is going to the extreme surveillance cameras in the county room. I think that's almost a little bit of extreme. Check should be stamped for deposit only immediately, so that they don't take them and put them in their account somehow. And the deposit should be done as soon as possible, whether it be in the night drop or first thing Monday morning. Rationalization, we talked about that a little bit. And make sure all individuals that handle cash funds are trained on the financial policies. Let them know what those policies are, because if they know what the policies are and they know you're going to do an audit at some point, that takes that opportunity away from them because they might get caught. Ensure that the staff and volunteers know the importance of their role, because they're important, but they've got to protect the church. Now what happens if it's detected? An audit is an independent evaluation of the financial report. A third party, some people have accountants actually do the audits. That's expensive. You're probably looking at $2,000 or $3,000 or more, depending on the size of the church. A lot of churches don't have those kind of extra funds laying around. So the other thing you could do is, like I said, you have 2 or 3 people come in and audit that aren't on the financial piece of anything within the church. But you should do some kind of annual audit, and an audit should include or may include a review of the cash and investment record, because you want to make sure that your investments are still there too, because if somebody's a signer on those investments, they could be pulling funds out and you wouldn't know. So you've got to have them look at those financial statements from the United Church funds, for instance, and make sure that they match up with last year. Or if they don't, find out why they don't match up. Interviews with staff and volunteers that handle the finances, a review of journal entries and authorized check signers, and other procedures as you might see fit. If you suspect, in a response, if you suspect fraud might have occurred, call your attorney immediately, call your insurance agent. Do not discuss it publicly with anyone. Don't talk to another church member or anything like that, because then things can get mixed up. And then contact law enforcement once your attorney and accountant feel you have sufficient evidence, which is important. Because when you have an embezzlement claim, the insurance company, for instance, the insurance board, we're going to require you to call law enforcement to take action against that individual, unfortunately, if the claim is to be covered. And then all the statistics that I showed you earlier, they can all be found at these 2 websites. Daryl said she has the PowerPoint presentation. She's already emailed it to the people that are on Zoom.
Correct.
And if you guys want it, just let her know and she'll email you my presentation, plus all the other ones. And then some additional items that you can find more information about that really have something to do with finances are cell tower leases. I didn't realize how many churches had cell tower leases, but quite a few churches have it. And you can go on the insuranceboard.org website, and I'm going to show you in a minute, but up in the top right-hand corner, there's a little eyeglass for search, and you click on that, and you just put like cell towers in there, and then it'll come up as things you need to watch out for if you have cell tower contracts. Because you say, well, what does that have to do with money? Well, that's money coming into you. You want to make sure you're doing the right things, that $500, or I have no idea how much you collect from those cell phone towers if there's one on your church property. But if, let's say it's $500 a month, and you think, wow, great, $500 a month. Well, down the road, 3 or 4 years later, maybe you did something wrong and it ends up costing you money. That was more money.
More than $500 a month.
It is.
It's very lucrative if you do it. You can do it.
There's an idea how to raise some money. If you got a steeple up there and you put a cell tower in that steeple. And I know down, if you're driving down I-25 near Monument, I think it is, there's that one tree off to the side that you look at it and you go, oh, that tree looks weird. Well, it's a cell tower that looks like a tree. I spent quite a bit of time down in Arizona, and they got palm trees that look like cell towers, and they look pretty realistic. But I don't think putting a palm tree here in Colorado might not fit in. Hold harmless agreements. Once again, the reason why I'm bringing this up is if you have any users of your church, you want to make sure that you're doing the proper job to protect the church in the case of a liability loss or something from that user. So you should always get a certificate of insurance asking to be named as an additional insured on their insurance. Doesn't cost them anything to do that as long as they have insurance. And then that way they're protected and you're protected. Gives you that extra layer of protection. Of course, from the insurance board aspect, we like to do that because that might prevent us having to pay a loss and their insurance company would have to pay it. But
do you have examples of those on your website?
Yep, all you got to do in that top right-hand corner, click on it, hit hold harmless agreement, and it'll pull up some samples for you.
And is there a building use agreement as well as a tenant
Yes,
contract?
there's a building use and some tenant contracts on our websites too. Yeah, you just have to do a little bit of searching, but they're pretty easy to find. You're in church as an employees and small business. I did bring a brochure. They're over here, and this kind of goes over your church as a business and gets you the proper information you need. And then also over on the table, I put this, and this really goes through a lot of our resources on a lot of other safety things regarding liability, whether it be sexual misconduct, directors and officers insurance, all kinds of stuff. So how do you make sure, and how often do you look to make sure your church is valued where it should be? If you're insured with the insurance board, and when I first come out and talk to people, when I insure their churches, I try to get as much information I can about that church. And it's not easy because some churches are, well, the Boulder Church, for instance, I mean, they've had 5 different remodels and connections. And I mean, they're just always doing stuff, and it's hard to figure that out. But every time they do a remodel, they call me, and then we usually add that value of the remodel back on to their property values. But we do have a couple of resources that actually are right here. This industrial appraisal company, they actually, not a lot of churches use it because it's kind of expensive. It's about $3,000 to $4,000 depending on the size of the church. But they actually send somebody out to your church, and they are experts at appraising the replacement cost of your church. What it would cost to rebuild it if it burned down to the ground completely. And they go through it very detailed. And I mean, it's about a 45-page report when they get done. And when one of my churches gets it done, and I've only had maybe a half a dozen of them do it, I mean, it takes me probably 3 hours to go through that report to look at everything because there's just so much information in there. But I try to stay up on it, and then I call the church and I say, hey, based on that report you just got, we need to maybe bump up your coverage a little bit. But whenever a church does anything to the church, whether it be a remodel, an addition, or they buy a new organ that's $500,000. I mean, I have one church that has like a $25 million organ in the church. I mean, it's huge. So you just have to make sure you do that. I just worked with, and I'm sure Lakewood UCC wouldn't mind me telling this, but we also have a Marshall Swift program that I can give them the form to fill out. And then I take that information, I submit it into the insurance board, they put it into the program, and it spits out the approximate rebuilding cost of the building and everything. And then we did that. And in this case, we needed to bump their insurance up by, I think it was like 350,000 so that the sanctuary and the parsonage were insured to rebuilding costs. And if you're insured with the insurance board, your building and contents amount automatically go up by 4% every year to try to stay with inflation. Falls a little bit behind probably here in Colorado, 4%, because unfortunately in Colorado, but that's, rebuilding costs aren't going up as fast as the retail side of buying a piece of property. And those are two separate things. And I have to explain that a lot to people, that we're concerned with the rebuilding. We want to make sure you have enough the property insured to value so that we can rebuild it the way it was. Unless you decide we do it. I have none here in Colorado, but in some states, they have some churches that are multi-million-dollar churches and they have 4 attendees at church. And so they have a different type of policy where we will replace the church on a functional, to make it functional for them, which means that if it's a $2 million building, they might only insure it for $500,000. If it burns down, then we'll build them something back that they'll be able to still worship in that's valued at $500,000, but then that's all they're paying for insurance. And we will do that on a case-by-case basis, but not too much. We don't have too many problems with that in Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. And then I wanted to also point out church accounting and QuickBooks. When I was preparing for this, I kind of went through the website and I'm looking at things that related to money. And I found out that on our website, insuranceboard.org, that you can go and they have a page on QuickBooks now has a nonprofit program that works really well with churches, and they have a lot of information on that. I read something that 90% of all churches use QuickBooks as it is. I don't know if they're using the nonprofit one or not, but the nonprofit program works a little bit better than the standard QuickBooks. And then they even have some opportunities where you, for like $30, you can do a training on the program on the website. And then if you have a boiler in your church, it's required by law that every year somebody comes in and inspects your boiler. That is a federal law. And so we send someone out to do that on our policies. And when they do that, they also look at other things. They look at other safety issues. They take a walk around just to make sure everything's safe and everything. And then they contact me if there's an issue, and then I'll contact the church. And then these are two things that are really important. The abuse prevention, and I know it doesn't deal with money, but it's important because this is one place that if you don't do the proper things and policies in place to prevent abuse, it just gives your church a bad name if you have a claim. So it's best if you try to do this. And even all these resources are available on our website. Everything is on there and anybody can use it, whether you're insured with the insurance board or not. So it's available to everyone, even the abuse training stuff, free of charge that we use emeritus. One thing I forgot, I just looked over at Tracy, is one of the other committees that I'm currently on is the Healthy Ministries, which is the new name for the old name of boundary training. And so the reason why I got on there is because of some of these resources like this, which are really important. And Healthy Ministries includes all that financial stuff too. And then there's a lot of educational resources, and they do almost a webinar every month. And you can go on there and look at past webinars. You can just go into the website and you can find that to look at any old webinars. Hey, I finished on time.
All right.
I want to thank you very much.